morning, this is Stan in Gainesville, Florida, and you are listening to Light Talk.
Hi, this is Steve in Dallas, Texas, and today we're going to talk about everything from the VL3000 to mopping the floor with Coke on Light Talk.
And this is David in beautiful Belmont Shore in the town of Long Beach, California. And if you don't already know, you are listening to Light Talk. And we are the Lumen Brothers.
Every single week we are the Lumen Brothers.
Welcome to episode 83.
Can I just say something about 83? Because 83 is 3 episodes away from 86. And if anybody ever worked in a short order like cafeteria, you guys know what 86ing something means?
That means throw it in the bin, right?
Yes, that's right. Throw it out.
Throw it in the bin.
It ain't happening.
86 that order. All right, I guess we give it to someone else. Okay.
I don't know where that comes from, but I knew that.
Right, just pour some syrup on it and serve it to table number 12. They'll take it. Anyway, so let's get started, gentlemen.
All right, we have Corey in Nashville, Tennessee, and he or she writes, the VL3000 spot has been around a long time. Is anyone still buying them new? Well, Corey, I don't know. You could probably have one made for you. Those things came out back in 2003, and in their day, they were quite a fantastic light. It's one of the best sellers that I think VL ever had. For those who haven't used a 3000, it's got a 6-to-1 zoom, CYM mixing, CTO on its color wheel. There are 3 gobo effect wheels on board. It does everything you expect a light to do. It's a 1200-watt arc source. 20,000 lumens come out of it. So, Corey, I kind of felt nostalgia, a bit of nostalgia for the 3000 a few months ago and thought I would go shopping for some. But I had forgotten a problem with them. That is, they're not auto-ranging. So that means you need a 200 to 264-volt source for them. So that was kind of a deal killer for me. You know, after the 3000 came out, that whole series, they made about 5 or 6 lights in that series. The 3515, which stepped it up to a 1500-watt lamp. So you had, instead of 20,000 lumens, you had 22,000 lumens. They had the 3500 series, the QT series. They also had the 3515 long throw, and that was a pretty amazing light. The long throw, you could get it with a 1500-watt arc lamp in there, and it gave you 41,000 lumens. So you're able to use that in the back of a stadium, or you could use it as a follow spot. They also had it rigged so that you could vary the lamp output. You could turn that into a 900, a 1200, or a 1650 lamp. So that was a pretty amazing thing. But I think if you're looking at the 3000, what I would suggest you really look at is the VLZ. The VLZ is kind of the latest version of the 3000 line. It definitely is the heir to that. So the VLZ, that's the light to go with. You're getting about 27,000 lumens out of it. It's got that really great fat lens on the front, has everything you're going to want in a light. And if you were a big fan of the 2000 series, then Verilight has the 2600 right now. So those are the 2 lamps I'd be looking at, the 2600 or the VLZ.
Yeah, you know, I am so excited about using the VLZ this week. I have a show loading into LA, and they have 6 VLZs in their inventory, and I've never used them on a show. And I think they're actually going to be perfect for what I want to use them for. I think I have 2 as shin kickers, the downstage shin kickers, because they have like a great zoom range. It's like, I don't know what, like 8 to like 50 degrees. And also I'm using them for a backlight wash and some other mid-stage specials and things like that. They look like a great light, and I know everyone has used them except for me, so I'm pretty excited about it. I'm mixing them in with a bunch of Vipers, too.
I found their color to be really beautiful. The color is just...
Yeah, I always love using new equipment. And there's so much new equipment out there, or newer equipment. It's easy for us to say, well, I've always used Vipers, and Vipers have always been dependable. I know what they do, and I know what to expect. And yeah, I mean, you know, there's a certain comfort zone in using that equipment that you know really well. But I also like the challenge. When a new light, they say, I'm sorry, we can't get Vipers. We have to get these VLZs. So what do? Okay, you do research. You go, and if you live in a large city, like 3 of us do, you go ahead and you find
Not me.
Well, that's true. But they have, but don't you guys have a rental shop called Swamps or Us?
Yeah, that must be
So,
the one
so
that
they
we
may
get
have
our stuff
VLZs,
from.
right? So, you go and check it out. Go and try it. But I am really excited about the VLZ, and I just want to say something about the 3000 series. Everyone knows who's a regular listener to Light Talk. I'm not a big fan of the 3500. However, and I'm talking about the Spot 3500. I think their wash lights were just fantastic. And those 3500 washes were, at the time, really the most powerful moving headlight you can get. And I used them a bunch of times in London and also in Canada. I mean, for big operatic strokes, lights through windows and things like that. So I think it was a great light. The only problem that I had with those were the noise. They were pretty loud, if I remember correctly. But yeah, long live the 3000.
Well, David, the thing you're going to like about the VLZ on this opera thing you're doing is they also have 4 different fan controls on it.
Yes.
They've got standard Studio 1, which is pretty darn quiet, Studio 2, which is very quiet, and Whisper, I'm telling you, I'm a few feet away and I don't hear it.
Well, is the light
now, you
on?
do lose.
Is the light
Well, you do, anytime you go into any kind of reduced fan configuration, you also lose some output.
Right.
But at 27,000 lumens, I'm about to use them on Cherry Orchard, so it doesn't matter to me that all of a sudden it drops down a few a few lumens because I don't want to dim the thing anyhow.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Steve. A lot of times we dim these lights down, and I guess I'm the biggest culprit because I want power. I want the brightest light I can get. But really, for plays and for certain applications, you don't need 27,000 lumens. You may only need like 1,000 lumens or 1,200 or 10,000 lumens. And by the time you dim them down, you've got this loud fan, right? So you might as well just put them in these modes. And I think these modes you're talking about, Steve, is really smart. I think it's really smart, especially when you're doing theater at short throws or medium throws. I think it's the way to go if you're using an arc lamp. But even if LED has fans too, so I'd be curious to see if that happens.
My philosophy on this is that if you're having to dim your light, your moving head, you picked the wrong moving head.
Right.
I mean, with today's inventory, when you look at the things that Clay Packey are making and Robe and ETC and High End and Martin, and everybody else, there is such a palette of brushes we can work with right now. You should be able to dial in pretty much exactly what you want if you have the budget.
Okay, I got to, speaking of dimming lamps, at LDI a few weeks ago, I'm sure you guys saw that the Phillips Verilight booth, and they had some old equipment there. They had like a VL2C there. They had a bunch of old controllers and stuff like that. They had a VL4 there, which was one of my favorite VL lights. But they had this VL2C pointed up on the wall. And that light, I believe, God, I forgot the wattage, but it was pretty hefty wattage for the time. And also
Mark 350, I
yeah,
think.
something like that. And they also had a new 2600 light, and it was pointed at the same spot. And that light was about 20, 30 times brighter than the VL2C. And I remember when the VL2C first came out, or the VL2 series, that thing was really bright. And it probably was for what we were used to. But now things are so bright, it's like, are we getting too bright?
I think that's Verilight's problem right now. That 2600 is 19,000 lumens. They have 2 fantastic lights. They've got the VLZ, and then a year later they've come out with the 2600. They've got they might have too many great lights right now.
Right.
So it's going to be interesting to see how they market them.
They kind of compete against themselves.
The 2600 is a smaller footprint, so it's certainly going to work in cruise boats, and I think you're going to see them all over Broadway because you can simply fit them into tighter places than the VLZ is.
Well, I just had to make a decision about some automated lights for a facility, and I was agonizing between, I was looking at high end, and I was agonizing between the Solar Frame 1000 and the 2000. And I thought, do I really need that much light? And then when you read their description, and it says, for small to medium-sized spaces, and that's really what I'm dealing with, a small to medium-sized space. And I just said, I'm not going to go to the 2000 because it's bigger, it's heavier, it's more costly, and probably don't need it.
Yep. And there are a lot of other great framing lights out now, LED framing lights. Clay Packey has They have a new series. I think it's a series 400. They do the 400, 600, 800. Those are really nice lights. And also, obviously, Phillips and who else? High end. Not high end, of course, but also Martin. So, these lights are out there.
Yeah, the Encore, the Martin Encore
Right.
is also
These
really
lights
nice,
are out there, so we actually have this amazing range. And Elation has a nice framing light. So, boy, I remember when we were dying for framing lights.
Well, we all drooled about the PAL 1200,
Well,
right?
well, the PAL 1200, and then soon after that, the VL 1000 was a framing light.
Right.
But
right.
it's so funny because now we have this great selection, and most of them are reasonably priced. So, yeah, pretty cool. So just to finish off on the 3000, the 3500 also had a framing light too, the 3500 spot.
Cody in Detroit writes, what do arenas get right? What do they get wrong? And what would you suggest they consider adding?
Well, I haven't had much experience in arenas, I mean, as far as working in them, but boy, have I seen a lot of concerts. And I must say that, we have an arena here in LA called the Forum. And it's an old arena that actually has been retrofitted and redesigned a lot of it. It's really great. At the time, I remember the old Three Dog Night album, Live at the Forum, I think came out in 1969. If you listen to that album, you'll hear how horrible it sounded. And it was partially because of the acoustics. But they've redone it. And I saw Fish there a few years ago. Chris Kuroda was the lighting designer on it. And it was beautiful. It was an amazing, amazing show. And a lot of it was because of the lighting positions they had there. Now, Chris doesn't use projections, at least he didn't at the time. But, the one thing that I think that arenas really have to be careful about are locations for projectors, for a good medium angle projection and also high angle, obviously, and front angle. So I think that, trying to retrofit those locations, some locations are very difficult to do because usually that first elevated area is fixed. They're not going to change that. So if that's going to be, locations for lights or projectors, then you're kind of stuck with that. So I think that would be a very important thing that if I was consulting and answering this question, that's one of the first things I would suggest. What do you think, Steve?
Well, I asked my sound brother, Jason, about this, and he came back and he said, in a nutshell, sound in an arena is much easier to produce, sounds a whole lot better than in a stadium. And he argues that an arena gets it right because they're an enclosed space.
Yeah.
And they have lots of ways to reverberate sound in that arena. Whereas in a stadium, you have an open air space for the most part. And he said you got 30, 40,000 plastic seats that aren't good for sound, and you've got scoreboards. So he said sound arenas have it right. The other thing he said about sound in an arena, and I hadn't considered this, is it's temperature controlled, whereas a stadium isn't. And he said sound refracts based on air quality and air density. And that was a lot easier to control in an arena than it was in an open-air stadium. So in a nutshell, the thing I would add to that is arenas are designed to be multi-purpose. And they're fine-tuning that more. Architects are fine-tuning that more and more and more. And if you look at a stadium, that has a sole purpose, and that is to make the home team look good. So also, I think I look at an arena. Arena has, you can put a lot of people in there, but concerts still feel very intimate in an arena. I don't think concerts feel intimate in a stadium. So, and then finally, sound good in an arena, sound bad, or sound much more difficult in a stadium.
So interesting that you commented about the stadium, because over a period of a few months, I saw several concerts in both arenas and stadiums. I saw Billy Joel actually in an arena in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, that sounded fantastic. I mean, unbelievably good, that you would expect from an artist like that. I saw Fish at the Forum, which also sounded very good. And then I saw Billy Joel, again, same tour, at Dodger Stadium. And you are right, Steve. I mean, the sound quality was very disappointing.
As I think about this, the other thing that jumps out at me is power. It's certainly changing, but I remember doing stadium tours, and we had 3 and 4 generator trucks parked outside. And if you go to an arena, there's plenty of power there. Stadiums are worried about hot dog stands, and again, architects have gotten it right, making these arenas into multi-purpose spaces that have good power quality, clean power in the building.
Yeah, that would make a huge difference. So Ann in Chicago asks, what should I know about rigging as an LD? All right, this could be long, but I'm going to keep it short. There's a reason why we have disclaimers on our light plots and in our contracts. There are expert riggers. Rigging is a field of its own. I have met many, many riggers in my career, and I'm sure Stan and Steve has as well. But the person who I feel is one of the finest riggers I ever met is a man named Eric Rouse. And Eric, he does all these LDI training sessions. He used to run the program. I think he had his own rigging program at Penn State. The guy is amazing. He also worked a lot for Cirque, and he was one of the original riggers on O. So the guy knows his stuff. And I depend on people like that. If I go in there, I don't know that much about rigging. I don't know much about loads. The electrician will tell me, this pipe will hold 2,000 pounds. And if I know every light is X amount of pounds and the cable's that amount of pounds, I could sort of get close. But boy, that electrician, if they're a good electrician, they'll say, David, you're overloading this pipe. And I think if we move the 3 Verilights that you have on this pipe to a pipe downstage, so we take some of the weight off that pipe, that'll be fine. And I say, thank God. Yes, thank God you're looking at this. That works for me. And I do it. And I think it's really more important that the electrician knows a lot about rigging. And if the electrician doesn't know everything they need to know about a particular problem, they go to the rigger or the technical director who should know a lot about rigging. And if they need to bring in a specialist, they bring in a specialist. But one thing I always do as a designer is that if anybody, the technical director, the production manager, the master electrician, if they say, David, we think putting this light there is unsafe, we suggest you doing something else, I do it. Because the last sentence of that disclaimer says very specifically that I will make a change if it's brought to my attention. And that last sentence reads, it is further understood that the designer is prepared to alter or permit the alteration of any specifications which may be found not compatible with proper safety precautions. This is crucial.
Well, I would say I have a friend, lighting designer, who's just been hired to be the principal designer for large industrial trade shows. He has a staff of about 8 people who work with him. And one of the things that his employer has done is actually send him to rigging school. Even though the company has their own rigging division, and they're not expecting him to rig, and they don't want him to rig. They want him to learn the language and understand what it is. They want him to understand stress loads so that he can have an intelligent conversation with a rigger. And it's interesting because they're also getting him certified as, I guess there's a certification for electricians now. And
ATCP?
he is... He's understanding generators, he's understanding load, and again, they don't expect him to go out and put it all together, but they do expect him to be able to have a conversation with the head electrician about what can and can't work and why things are done a certain way.
Right.
So I think the more you know, the better off you are. You just want to respect that you know enough to have a good conversation, but you don't necessarily know enough to be the boss of the specialists who are working with you.
Exactly. I mean, you are not an expert. In order to be an expert rigger, it takes tons of training. And I agree with Steve. You have to know enough, but you defer to the experts in the room.
We do rigging in my consultancy, and I would say that we are consciously incompetent, which basically means we know what we don't know. Mm-hmm. So we know some stuff, right? And we have to think about it. when we make a recommendation, but we also know when we're treading out beyond our scope of expertise and knowledge. So we've done some pretty sophisticated rigging systems. We're doing some now. We're doing one in a theater that's a new product. ETC just launched a product called Flypipe. It's a really interesting rigging product. It's so simple that you don't even have to have rigging people install it, they say. But we won't specify companies who don't have riggers to put it in. And so I understand how it works, but I will talk to the structural engineer. They will understand the dynamic loads. They'll do the math, and the math you have to know, and the math doesn't lie, right? So that's what Eric is so great about. The math is extensive. So it's an area that, but I will also agree with Steve. It's good to know if you work in lighting, and I do, and both as a designer and as a consultant, we have to sort of be aware of how rigging works and how to work with it and how to be safe with it, because still, disclaimers notwithstanding, you can still be found negligent. And that's why David's line about, please come to me with a change and I will adjust accordingly, because you can't just throw your hands up and say, oh, I don't understand that.
Yeah, I totally agree, Stan. You just have to, know what you don't know. And
know what you don't know.
And also, we are kind of blessed because we're at points in our careers where we're working with really good people. And most theaters and venues that we work in have people who are experts in this. But what if you're a young designer and you're working for a company that doesn't have a really super qualified staff, and you see something that you think is unsafe? By all means, bring it to someone's attention. You have to.
It's a good point.
It's a very dangerous business, and we have to take care of ourselves. And there's a reason why all these fire laws and rigging law, all the stuff that we deal with all the time, there's a reason why these codes are there. And if you see something that you question a bit, like you see a pipe bending 45 degrees, from a moving light or something like that, bring it to somebody's attention, please, because chances are there's something, dreadfully wrong there.
I think you make a really good point, David, that it is a big difference between the three of us who sort of are around people who have competencies. And when you're young and it's a bunch of people and you're making art or you get hired to some small venue, it's a different situation. And you might see something that your little red flag in your brain goes up and goes, that's a little risky. And then it's really easy to convince yourself that, oh, it's going to be okay and it's fine. I don't think anything's ever going to happen. And so you really do have to sort of think about risk when you're young in particular and go, is this a risk? And is this, I'll give an example. Maybe this is a good piece of language to use for people. When I was doing some early consulting in the Midwest years ago, we would go into these places that were literally, we would see things hung with baling wire. Farmers put it up. And when we would talk to the officials about, do we think it's safe? Or what measure do you use to determine if something is safe? And I, rather than giving a technical one, I use more of a poetic, dramatic one. I say, let me just ask you this. Would you feel okay bringing your mother or your family or your children and sitting them on the stage under that stuff? And if you don't, then you probably ought to do something about it. And if you think it's fine, then bring your grandmother in to sit there. And that was sort of like a way where people, okay, see what you're saying. Because it was very easy for people to rationalize and say, yeah, I think it'll be all right. Well, you put your loved one under it and see if you're comfortable with that. That's one way to sort of maybe judge whether you really ought to get a competent opinion.
It depends on your relationship with your family members.
I guess that's
especially
true.
With in-laws,
Well, you are listening to Light Talk with Steve, Stan, and David, the Lumen Brothers. And Light Talk today is sponsored by...
Have moving lights become a little too feature-rich? Are you brain dead from trying to keep up with moving light technology? Perhaps Clay Packey and Martin are just out of your budget range. Well, don't worry. From across the mighty Pacific, Illegitimate Panda offers you the Crippled Dragon. At only $99 US, it's a bargain. It even comes with a travel case. How does the Panda make it so budget-friendly, you might ask? Simple. No matter where you mount the Crippled Dragon, on the deck or in the air, it only pans stage right. That's the beauty of the Crippled Dragon. Think of the time you're going to save at tech. Now you can make 10 out of 12 truly a thing of the past. And to speed up queuing even more, the Crippled Dragon has no iris, no shutter, no gobos, no animation wheel, and no diffusion. What the heck kind of light is this, Panda? Don't be rude, foreign devil. We will throw in as a free bonus A, cyan, or A, magenta, or A, yellow color wheel. That's right, just one color. But that's why you're a pro. What's not to love? The Crippled Dragon, the flagship of Illegitimate Panda's new Crippled lighting series. Coming soon, the Splosh. It's not a spot, it's not a wash, it's a splosh.
It's a splosh.
Illegitimate Panda, always thinking of things you never considered. Ask about our discounted bulk price. See you at the Circle Bar, Guello.
Guello! I've worked with Guello. So, if I am correct, it turns in one direction, which is one-directional motor.
It runs
Right.
on a gimbal.
But yeah, because it can't turn the other direction, so it must go 360 degrees continually. And then it has one motor for whatever color you want.
Yes.
And that's it,
Yeah,
right?
there's no tilt. There's just a pan to the right and one color wheel.
As in panda. It's the panda.
Oh, I
to
get
the
it. The illegitimate panda tilt. I like that.
And now, back to Light Talk.
All right, guys, you hear that sound in the background? Well, no, we're not. No, we're not at the end of the show. It just means
Is it a duck? Is it a duck? Is it a harp?
It's a cross between a duck and a harp and some flatulence. So what that is, it's a sound, our new sound for our Let's Talk About segment. And today we're going to talk about something that actually came up with one of my students last week. They were doing a show, and they were sitting down with the director after months of talking about concept and looks and showing storyboards and everything else. And this designer is a very, very good third year designer, and she brought up some systems or some lights, and all of a sudden the director said, "Wow, that's fantastic! Let's go with that." And it was totally in left field because she thought that this director's aesthetic was totally different. So this brings up the point of when you're working with a new director, yes, you can talk about aesthetic, you can talk about how things are looking, but boy, when you sit down at the table and you bring up a light or a system or whatever, and that director either reacts positively or negatively, what type of adjustment must you make at that point? And I think that happens to everybody whenever you work with a new director. So how can you get around that? How can you prepare for that director's aesthetic? What do you guys think?
For me, this really is conversations and getting to know the person a little bit, talking to them about how they see the play unfolding, what they think the important parts of the play are. It is that kind of pre-production work and pre-design work in which I discover what the director's aesthetic is. And I certainly am being reinforced by his or her aesthetic once we're in the rehearsal process. I think we have to rethink how we do lighting. I think we can't isolate ourselves from the director. We can't.
I agree with Steve. I think I was thinking about what you're getting at, and I think you're right. Maybe it's like the Starbucks effect. You got to go have coffee. You got to go sit with them. You've got to the two of you need to build a friendship.
Yeah.
That's how I've always worked, and I try to build that friendship as quickly as possible. And then it's not a surprise when we're sitting down making the lights because we've been talking about it for weeks and weeks.
And that's how it works. That's how it works 90% of the time. But what I'm talking about is this designer did all this stuff. And then when you sit down at the table and you start bringing up lights, then all of a sudden you discover the true director's aesthetic. So again,
so you think the rest of it was fake or not?
I don't
very
think
effective?
I don't think this director really knew what they were thinking about. Or she would show the director something. He'd say, "Wow, that's great. That's perfect for the opening scene." And then when you're sitting down in that incredible, energized theatrical creation mode in the theater with everyone else around, and you bring up a system of lights in 3D, and you're sitting in that environment, all of a sudden everything changes. And this has happened to me, not with obviously not with directors you worked with for a long time, but it happens a lot with new directors, and you have to learn how to go with it. I mean, you can't like argue the thing. It's like you try to understand why the director liked that and why it may work and may work very well.
I'm thinking back to that article that we posted from Jane Cox. I think it was Jane Cox about the female lighting designers,
Right.
and she was saying so eloquently about how really what we do is so much a response to what is happening on the stage when it's happening on the stage, and a lot of that stuff that we do early on sometimes doesn't make it into the room, and you just got to be prepared to perform with what you have in that room. And I was telling my students the other day that I think we're talking about Beverly Emmons and something that she used to do at American College Theater Festivals. Everybody have to light a scene, and there would be this repertory plot, and then the students would get there, and she would then intentionally pull the rug out from under them, change where they were going, change what scene was being done, and just say, now light it with what you have in the moment. And I think in some ways that's sort of what we do sometimes.
I agree. And we have to be in that mindset for the entire production, entire production process until opening night, because things will change and sometimes they take a huge left turn, which is why
you just go with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's why I said at the LDI show, I'm so glad that I'm not a set designer sometimes. I do some set design, but most of the time I'm a lighting designer, because it's hard. You can't make that left turn as a set designer because everything's built. Yeah. The only thing you can do is cut. Okay, let's cut the set.
And I think in some ways it becomes a little bit of an improvisational process, and that's becoming easier for us because technology has made it easier for us to respond in the moment.
You have to be able to improvise. That is really one thing we didn't say that when that question came up. What makes a good lighting designer? And I think what you just said, Stan, really hits it on the nail. It's improvisation. That's what jazz is. It's improvisation.
You just took the word right out of my mouth, because I sometimes get accused in my classes of not always being so organized. Right. And I'm organized in the sense that I have a direction. I know where I want to go. I know what the destination is. But the way I get there is more like jazz. Right, I think of myself as a jazz player, so I've got a certain amount of structure and there's a certain amount of looseness, and I think that's really important for any artist, really.
Yep. So our last question comes from Anonymous, another anonymous listener. And Anonymous, somewhere in the United States of America, asks, "My teacher keeps insisting that we mop the dance floor with Coke. He says it helps the dancers keep their footing. It just seems nasty to me. Any thoughts?" Okay, I've got a couple.
I've heard this.
Okay.
This is an urban myth.
No, it's not.
Steve is going to.
It's not an urban myth.
You guys are going to enlighten, because I've heard this for years, but I don't know the truth or not.
Sometimes the floors, and whether they be dance floors or they be, for sets, for theater or opera. I've hit this a lot of times in opera, where the floors are made out of formica. Right? Some sort of a very shiny type of... I did a show at the Lyric. I'll never forget it. And Kevin Knight designed the set and costume. It was beautiful. It was a Lulu. And that's a show that you rarely do because it's so technically demanding. And also on the singers as well. And the deck was white formica, and it was raked. And in the last scene, Jack the Ripper comes on and kills Lulu, and there's blood everywhere. So it was pretty slippery. So here's the deal. There is a way to unslip a floor. Coke actually is a method that's been used for a long, long time. And you water down the Coke. I think it's 1 to 10 or something like that. However, there's something very important, that if you're going to use Coke, you got to make sure it's the Coke that's made in Mexico. It's got to be Mexican Coke. I am not kidding you. Because the Mexican Coke uses a different type of sugar, apparently. It'll keep you from slipping. The other thing that you can do is buy a product called Slip No More. Steve, have you ever dealt with this?
Anonymous in America. Let me just say.
That's all of us.
Don't listen to David.
Let me just say, when David was working...
Let's just say sugar cane versus corn syrup, right?
When David was working with Aesculus at the Greek theater... This might have been true.
Hey, don't knock Aesculus.
This might have been true, but I agree with you. This is some damn nasty stuff. Don't put Coke on your dance floor. Let me tell you right now, dance floors, modern dance floors, are made with different degrees of tackiness, different degrees of slippage. So you can tune a dance floor into a dance company. And I'm just going to say, call Roscoe up and they can explain how they tune a floor. But no, don't put Coca-Cola on your floor. This is, people also say use vinegar. Coca-Cola or vinegar or something like that, that is going to destroy the factory finish on the floor. Coke will literally dissolve your floor, and vinegar mixed with the sweat and the bodily oils on the floor will actually make it even slicker. So I'd also say be very careful about going down to your local grocery store and finding some household detergents, because most household detergents for floors are meant to make it shiny, and shiny equals slippery. The other thing you don't want to do, so when you go back to your teacher and grab him by his throat and say, the Lumen Brothers said, drink your Coke, don't pour it on the floor.
Well, two of the Lumen Brothers say that. I'm sticking with my Coke story because Aesculus knew. He knew what the hell was going on. You never heard of anyone slipping in the Greek theater.
Now,
I'm sorry.
I just think if you put all that sweetener on your floor, depending upon where you live, you are going to attract all kinds of critters and vermin and insects. It just doesn't make sense to me. Steve, you worked at the Joyce. I worked at the Joyce. I never saw anybody use anything except good, clean, hot water, right, on a dance floor after it was perfectly swept, right? It was always like first the sweep from the wings towards the center of the stage. This was the method we were taught at the Joyce Theater in the 80s. From the wings to center, from upstage to downstage. Then you get the big stuff off. Then you come with the hot mop. Okay, usually two people, again, going from outside, off stage to inside. And then the third phase, after you did the hot mopping or the warm mopping, was the dust mop, which took off the most fine particles. I never saw. Now, occasionally, on maybe a new floor, somebody used Slip No More or something like that. But professionally, I've never seen that happen.
When Stan was working with Sophocles, that was the way to do this. But water on your dance floor is not a happy thing. The problem is oil and water don't mix. So at the end of resulting it just with hot water or warm water, all you're doing is spraying that oil residue all over the floor. I talked with several different floor manufacturers. Now, they clearly have a dog in the fight because they also make cleaners for their floors. And they're very specific. Don't use my cleaner on manufacturer A's floor, right. And certainly don't use manufacturer A on my floor either. The floors have just changed a lot. The other big thing I see a lot is I go somewhere and here comes the kind of ammonia, alcohol, and acetone out. These are bad things too. Don't wash your floor with ammonia. Don't wash it with alcohol. All you're doing is going to dry your floor and crack it out. Whomever made your floor, I would call them up and I would say, how should I clean this floor? And they may come back to you and say, use, Joy dishwashing liquid. Or they may come back and say, clean it with hot water and put some Slip No More on it. But the point is you need to talk to the manufacturer and not kind of urban legends how best to clean your floor. The other weird thing, if you have a dance floor down at your studio, at your school, you really should pull, if you butt it up against each other and tape it on the top, which most people do, you should pull that tape off about every 4 months and put fresh tape down, because the glue in that tape is going to make the seams on the floor brittle. So if you think about it, most schools, mine too, put a floor down and leave it down in a dance studio for 2 or 3 years, and they just replace tape as they need to. But that glue in the tape is attacking your floor also.
Yeah, we have 3 dance studios at UF, which we probably spent about $250,000 on. And we've been collecting fees on them since we opened the building in 2005, and we're about to replace the large dance studio. And we had a long conversation with the original installer, and it's going to run us $90,000 to replace that floor. It's all on floating panels, and the panels in that space are hot seamed, so there's no glue. And I don't know how much we clean it at all, to be honest. Maybe when we do a production, it serves as a studio for the most part. But yeah, I don't know. I guess the professional cleaners are the right way to go.
Listen, I don't know. We don't need no stinking multi-million-dollar dance floor. In the Greek theater, we did everything in dirt, right?
Stone.
So we did stone and dirt. No one ever slipped in the Greek theater. And just to set the record straight before we end the show, Stan did not work with Sophocles. He worked with Caligula. He's more of a Roman guy. I'm more of the Greek guy.
Caesar.
Hell, Caesar. That Hammond organ solo in the background tells us that once again you've spent another morning listening to the three guys on Light Talk. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our podcast. And that way you will not miss a second of Light Talk insanity.
No guarantee is offered regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on this podcast.
Now, just in case you make the unfortunate error of taking us seriously and decide to litigate us, the three great lawyers we have, Mr. Tungsten, Miss Phosphor, and Philip, are getting brighter all the time, and they will defend us until our retirement accounts are depleted.
Light Talk is written and produced by the Lumen Brothers, coming to you from Long Beach, Gainesville, and the Lone Star State.
And be sure to tune in next week when we discuss moving lights for the modest stage. Well, who's modest? What is Automark? Interactive events and new lighting technology, and Lost Tech Dad down at the high school.
Hey, come on back for all of that and a new sponsor, Light Talk, broadcasting questionable Lumen knowledge and humor around the world.
So we'll see you next Saturday morning. Bye-bye from Light Talk.
So long, everybody. See you later.
Light Talk.